I didn't bring lipstick that night, only 3 sealed envelopes. He had called me Barren in front of his colleagues. I just smiled, poured the wine, and waited for dessert. At the gold-plated table in the Aurelia. I slipped an envelope under my husband's plate, one under his bosses, and one under their lead investors. When they opened them simultaneously, the string quartet fell silent. There was only the rustle of paper as their careers imploded. My name is Nora Vale. I am 33 years old, and my professional title is Head of Compliance for Caldera North, a fintech firm that prides itself on disruption but runs on the same old currency of ambition and betrayal. Our offices are in Brimwell, a city of steel and glass that gleams in the sun and looks like a cage in the rain. My job is to know the rules, all of them, the ones written in bylaws and the ones whispered in boardrooms. I enforce them. It is not a job that makes you popular. It is a job that makes you necessary. My husband is Ethan Crowell. He is 36, the Director of Business Development, a title that means he has a firm handshake and a smile that can sell sand in a desert. He works in the same building, 20 floors above me, in a department that generates revenue while mine mitigates the risks they create. We were a corporate power couple, a perfectly balanced portfolio of success. From the outside, our lives were as clean and polished as the marble lobby of our building. The first crack in that facade appeared on a Tuesday, during the quarterly all-hands meeting. The air in the conference hall was thick with the scent of lukewarm coffee and forced enthusiasm. Our CEO was on stage, clicking through a presentation filled with upward-trending graphs and corporate jargon. I was in my usual seat in the third row, my leather-bound notebook open, a pen poised in my hand. My focus was absolute. I documented everything. Then came the Q&A session. Ethan, ever the showman, took the microphone. He stood, his suit perfectly tailored, his confidence radiating to the back of the room. "Great quarter. Mark," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "I have a question about the new flexible work-from-home policy. We're all talking a lot about work-life balance." He paused for effect, letting the phrase hang in the air. His eyes scanned the crowd and then, with surgical precision, they landed on me. He smiled that familiar, charming smile, the one he used on clients just before closing a deal. "But I guess that's less of a concern for some of us. Some of us won't have kids to balance. Anyway." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter, thin and brittle, spread through the room. It was the sound of 100 people not knowing where to look. They looked at him, then at me. His colleagues from the sales floor snickered a little louder. My team looked at their laps. I did not flinch. My expression remained neutral, a mask of professional calm I had perfected over a decade in this industry. My gaze met his for a fraction of a second. I saw the glint of casual cruelty in his eyes, the deliberate performance. Then I looked down at my notebook. My hand was steady as I wrote in the margin, my script small and neat. Instance 1. Public humiliation, corporate setting. It was not an emotional entry. It was a data point. The poison of his words spread faster than a market rumor. By the time I returned to my desk, the whispers had already slithered down the 20 floors between us. "Did you hear what Ethan said about Nora?" The words echoed from the break room to the water cooler. They materialized on the company's internal chat system, little green bubbles of gossip. "Is it true? Nora's infertile?" That was cold. He said it in front of everyone. Someone posted a shocked face emoji. It was deleted seconds later. But not before I saw it. I watched the digital chatter from my screen. My face unreadable. I was no longer Nora Vale, head of compliance. I was a subject of pity, a cautionary tale. A woman defined by a single, cruel word, Barren. The next day, I received an email from Human Resources. The subject line was, "Catching Up, Brenda from HR." A woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, wanted to have a confidential and supportive chat. I knew what that meant. It meant damage control. It meant the company was protecting itself. Her office was sterile, decorated with motivational posters about teamwork and integrity. She offered me a bottle of water. I declined. She folded her hands on her desk, a picture of practiced empathy. "Nora," she began, her voice soft, "we want you to know this is a safe space. We've heard some chatter, and we're concerned about your well-being." I stared at her, my silence a blank wall she couldn't climb. "We understand that issues related to reproductive health can be very stressful," she continued, navigating the words like a minefield. "We want to make sure you have all the support you need. If you feel your workload is becoming too much to handle, given the circumstances, we can discuss potential adjustments." There it was, the insinuation, that I was now a liability, that my personal struggle made me less capable. They weren't offering support. They were building a case. They were documenting my potential weakness, laying the groundwork to manage me out if I became too emotional, too distracted, too barren. "Thank you, Brenda," I said, my voice even. "I appreciate the company's concern for my well-being. My performance has not been and will not be affected. Is there anything else?" She was taken aback by my directness. "Oh, no, that's all. The door is always open." As I walked back to my office, I felt the weight of the platinum wedding band on my left hand. It suddenly felt foreign, a shackle. I slipped it off my finger. The skin underneath was pale, indented. I didn't drop the ring into my purse because our marriage was over. I did it because it was getting in the way. I needed my fingers to be free, unencumbered for the work ahead. I needed to be able to grip a pen without a circle of metal reminding me of the lie I was living. That night, our apartment was quiet. The city lights of Brimwell glittered outside our floor-to-ceiling windows, a silent audience to our Cold War. Ethan was in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of expensive scotch. He acted as if nothing had happened. He talked about a new client, a potential deal. I let him talk. When he was finished, I spoke. "The meeting today." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, not looking at me. "What about it?" "It was a good meeting." Mark was impressed with my question. "Your comment," I clarified, my voice dangerously low. "The one about me." He finally turned. Leaning against the marble countertop, he had the audacity to look annoyed. "Oh, Nora, you're being too sensitive. It was a joke. Just some locker room talk to lighten the mood." "It wasn't a locker room. Ethan, it was a company-wide meeting. You called me Barren in front of 200 of our colleagues." He sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of manufactured patience. "I didn't use that word, and I was just telling the truth. It's what we've been dealing with, isn't it? It's our reality." My blood ran cold. The sheer, unadulterated nerve of him. He was using our private pain as a public weapon, then framing it as an act of honesty. The man I married had vanished, replaced by this stranger who saw my body as a narrative tool for his own advancement. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the full scope of his deception. The mask of the supportive husband had slipped, revealing the cold, calculating opportunist beneath. "The truth," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence of the room like shattering glass. "Has a case file number." For the first time, his smug composure faltered. A flicker of confusion, of alarm, crossed his face. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. I turned without another word and walked into my home office. I sat down in the leather chair, the city lights painting stripes across the desk. My hands didn't tremble as I powered on my laptop. The screen flared to life, illuminating my face in its cold blue light. I moved the cursor with methodical precision. Right-click, new folder. I typed the name, the letters appearing one by one, stark and final. Aurelia. Evidence. Our marriage wasn't a romance. It was a merger. It began not with a heartfelt proposal on one knee, but with a meeting in a lawyer's office, the scent of leather and old paper hanging in the air. Ethan had proposed the prenuptial agreement. He'd framed it as a practical necessity, a smart move for two ambitious people on an upward trajectory. "It protects us both. Nora," he'd said, his hand covering mine on the polished mahogany table. "It keeps things clean. I, the pragmatist, the compliance expert, had agreed. I read every line, every subclause. It was a standard document, mostly concerned with assets and alimony. Until I reached Section 4B, it stipulated that if either party engaged in behavior that resulted in significant reputational damage to the other, potentially impacting their professional standing or ongoing business deals, they would forfeit any claim to the other's unvested company stock options. At the time, I saw it as a shield. I never imagined it was a blueprint for a weapon he would one day aim at me. After we were married, the talk of children began almost immediately. It was Ethan who brought it up, always in public, always with a warm, wistful smile. At company dinners, he would put his arm around me and say to his boss, "We're hoping to add a new member to the Caldera North family soon." In front of our friends, he'd toast to the future, his eyes finding mine across the table, a perfect picture of a devoted husband eager to start a family. I wanted that too, or so I told myself. It was the next logical step in our carefully constructed life plan. But his public enthusiasm was a performance. In private, a strange pattern of avoidance emerged. He was the one who pushed to get the process started, just to make sure everything is okay. Yet every time I scheduled a preliminary consultation with a fertility specialist, a last-minute crisis would materialize. "Sorry, babe, a huge client just flew in. I have to take them to dinner. Can you reschedule?" Or, "The deal I've been working on for 6 months is about to close. I can't step away from the office for 3 hours. You understand." I understood. His career was demanding, so I rescheduled, and rescheduled again. I started paying closer attention. I noticed how emails confirming these appointments would vanish from our shared digital calendar, deleted without comment. Yet, dinner reservations with Lyle Carr, our company's key venture capital investor, remained etched in stone. A golf outing with his direct superior, the head of revenue, was sacrosanct. The medical appointments were fluid, disposable. The business engagements were not. He was meticulously curating a digital record of his priorities, and our future family was not one of them. Tired of the delays, I decided to be proactive. Caldera North's health insurance plan was excellent, offering comprehensive coverage for fertility assistance. I started the paperwork myself, filling out my medical history, my details. I submitted the initial application. A week later, an automated email from HR landed in my inbox. My request was on hold. The reason? Incomplete file, awaiting medical diagnosis and records for spouse. When I showed Ethan the email, he barely looked up from his phone. He was scrolling through market reports, his thumb moving in a quick, dismissive rhythm. "Well, that's not on me," he said, his tone flat. "I'm fine. We both know where the problem is." The statement was delivered with the casual cruelty of a paper cut, a small, sharp sting that takes a moment to bleed. It wasn't an accusation. It was, in his mind, a settled fact. His health was a given. Mine a question mark. The gaslighting was a slow poison. It made me question my own body, my own sanity. I started to believe him. Maybe it was me. Maybe my demanding job. The stress, the long hours had taken a toll. I went to our primary care physician alone. He suggested I was perfectly healthy but recommended a joint comprehensive screening to get a full picture. It was a standard, logical step. That night, I tried to discuss it with Ethan. I approached it carefully, using neutral, clinical language. "Dr. Matthews thinks it would be best if we both did a comprehensive workup," I said. "It would give us a complete data set to work with." His reaction was volcanic. He threw his tablet onto the sofa, the sound making me jump. "A data set? Is that what this is to you now? Another compliance report?" His voice was sharp, laced with a fury I hadn't seen before. "I told you, I'm fine. Why are you so obsessed with this? Why can't you just accept that some things aren't meant to be? You're turning this into a sickness, Nora." He called me obsessed. The word hung in the air between us, acrid and ugly. I had been called many things in my career: thorough, relentless, meticulous, but obsessed. He was using my professional strengths as a weapon against my personal life, twisting my competence into a pathology. I didn't argue, I just retreated into a cold, silent space inside myself. The fight wasn't about a doctor's appointment anymore. It was about his desperate need to control the narrative, to ensure that the problem, if there was one, was assigned solely to me. A few nights later, he returned late from a business trip. As I was unpacking his suitcase, putting his laundry in the hamper, my fingers brushed against a stiff rectangle of paper in a side pocket. It wasn't a receipt or a business card. It was a folded invoice from a place I'd never heard of. Klein & Rowe Urology. The address was in a suburb an hour outside of Brimwell. The description of services was vague, private consultation and procedure, but the date was very specific. It was from 18 months ago, just a week after he first signed the prenup with the reputational damage clause. My heart didn't race. It grew still, heavy, and cold in my chest. I photographed the invoice with my phone, my hand perfectly steady, and placed it back in his suitcase exactly as I had found it. That was the moment the wife receded and the compliance officer took over. My grief was a luxury I could not afford. My anger had to be converted into fuel. The next morning, I bought a new digital voice recorder, a small, discreet device. The laws in our state, the fictional Commonwealth of Norland, were clear. One-party consent was all that was required for a legal recording. My subsequent conversations with Brenda in HR, every supportive chat, every carefully worded inquiry about my well-being and workload adjustments, was documented and saved. Each file was labeled with the date, time, and participants. I did not cry. Crying would cloud my judgment. Instead, I went to my office after hours. The city a tapestry of glittering lights below. On a clean white sheet of paper, I began to draw a map. It wasn't a map of a city, but of a conspiracy. I drew a box in the center and wrote, Ethan. Then I drew lines radiating outwards. One line went to his boss, the head of revenue, the man who stood to gain if Ethan's stock options were maximized. Another line went to Brenda, the head of HR, the woman tasked with creating a paper trail of my supposed instability. A third line, thicker than the others, went to a name I knew well from investment reports, Lyle Carr, the lead investor whose fund held a controlling interest in Caldera North. He and Ethan played golf. They had dinner. They were allies. They were all connected. Ethan's public humiliation of me wasn't just a moment of personal cruelty. It was a strategic move. The whispers, the visit to HR, his refusal to be tested. It was all part of a coordinated campaign. They weren't just attacking my character. They were engineering a scenario. I saw the endgame with perfect, chilling clarity. They were building a case to paint me as an emotionally unstable, underperforming employee, distracted by a tragic personal battle with infertility. They wanted me to break down. They wanted me to quit, or they wanted to create just enough cause to fire me. My eyes followed the lines I had drawn, the web of deceit, my stock options, a significant part of my compensation package, were due to vest in 6 months. If I left the company before then, for any reason, they would be forfeited. They would be absorbed back into the company pool, increasing the value of the shares held by others, by Ethan, by his allies. In the center of the diagram, in the empty space between the names, I picked up my pen. I wrote down the motive, the answer to the entire equation, the cold, hard logic behind his betrayal. My script was as precise and unforgiving as a legal statute. Motive: force my departure before stock vesting. My first move was not an accusation, but a request. A single, formal email sent to the general HR inbox, with a carbon copy sent to my own encrypted, off-site archive. The subject line was clinical. Employee Data Access Request, pursuant to Caldera North Policy 7.4.2. I cited the company's own internal governance, the very rules I was paid to enforce. I requested a complete, unredacted copy of my employee file, including my entire benefits and welfare history, all related correspondence, and a full log of all access and modifications made to my records. It was my legal right as an employee. It was also a test, a baited hook dropped into the corporate waters to see who would bite. The response was silence. A week passed, then another. This, too, was data. On the 15th day, I followed up. This time, I used my system privileges as head of compliance to track the internal ticket generated by my request. What I found was a quiet, deliberate campaign of obstruction. The system log was a digital breadcrumb trail of malice. My request had been flagged, deprioritized, and rerouted 3 times. Each time, the action was logged under the credentials of the same junior HR generalist, a young woman named Sarah, who I'd seen having lunch with Ethan in the corporate cafeteria on more than one occasion. She was Brenda's subordinate. She was their pawn. The system showed she had opened my file, held the ticket in her personal queue for days, and then passed it to a different department with a note. Non-urgent. Follow up as per standard timeline. There was no standard timeline for a policy-bound request. They were stalling, hoping I would forget, hoping I would become too emotional to follow procedure. I did not get emotional. I escalated. I drafted a formal internal complaint for procedural violation. It was a masterpiece of cold, corporate fury. I attached a timeline of my requests, the lack of response, and a screenshot of the system log showing the deliberate delays, redacting Sarah's name and replacing it with HR representative. I did not want to target the pawn. I wanted the players who were moving her. I detailed the company's own policy back to them. Citing the required 10 business day response time, I concluded with a simple sentence. I await a prompt resolution to this matter and the immediate release of my files as required by corporate governance. I sent it directly to Brenda, with a blind copy to my lawyer. The response came back in under an hour. It was a single line of sanitized, dismissive text. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. The matter will be reviewed. They were not solving the problem. They were documenting that I was becoming one. I realized I could not rely on their systems to give me the truth. Their systems were compromised. Part of the weapon they were building against me. I had to create my own data, on my own terms. I researched private medical clinics in the city, looking for one far from our downtown orbit, a place where no one would recognize my name or Ethan's. I found the Rivermere Women's Health Center, a discreet facility with excellent reviews and a sterling reputation for privacy. I booked a comprehensive fertility screening for 2, paying the exorbitant out-of-pocket fee with my personal credit card. I did not use our names. I used the alias Mr. and Mrs. Stone. That evening, I forwarded the appointment confirmation to Ethan's personal email. The confirmation came in the form of a sleek, anonymous QR code for check-in. I attached a simple message. I've handled everything. All you have to do is show up. Saturday, 10 a.m. I didn't ask. I instructed. I watched him from across the living room as he opened it on his phone. A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps panic, crossed his face before he smoothed it over with his usual mask of indifference. I'll see if I can move some things around, he said, not looking at me. He never mentioned it again. On Saturday morning, I went to Rivermere alone. The waiting room was calm, filled with soft music and the scent of lavender. I checked in as Mrs. Stone. When the nurse called my name, she asked, "Will Mr. Stone be joining you?" I smiled. A small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No," I said. He was unavoidably detained. I went through with every test. I gave my blood, answered the questions, and subjected myself to the clinical examinations. I was methodical, calm, and cooperative. I was gathering evidence. The results arrived via a secure online portal 4 days later. I opened the PDF. My breath held not in hope, but in anticipation of confirmation. The report was pages long, filled with medical terminology and hormonal levels. But the summary on the final page was unequivocal. I read it 3 times. Conclusion: all assessed values are within normal ranges. No indications of fertility impairment were found. I was not barren. I was not broken. I was a variable they had tried to incorrectly solve for. I saved the document to my encrypted drive. It was piece number 2 for the Aurelia file. Now I had proof of my health, but I needed proof of his deceit. The invoice from Klein and Rowe Urology was a starting point, but it wasn't enough. It was circumstantial. I needed something official, something legally unimpeachable. I needed a professional. Through my legal contacts, I found a private investigator. He was an ex-Brimwell PD detective with a license in Norland and a reputation for being thorough and, more importantly, discreet. His name was Frank Miller, and he had a voice that sounded like gravel and coffee. I met him in a small, anonymous coffee shop downtown. I didn't give him my name. I told him I was a consultant working a corporate fraud case. I laid out the parameters clearly. I needed a verified record of financial transactions made by a specific individual, Ethan Crowell, to a specific medical entity, Klein and Rowe Urology, and I needed any legally obtainable confirmation of services rendered. I transferred him a substantial retainer. He nodded, took a sip of his black coffee, and said, "Give me a week." He took 4 days. The email he sent contained 2 attachments. The first was a detailed financial trace, cross-referencing Ethan's corporate and personal credit card statements, which Frank had legally obtained through a financial subpoena pretext he wouldn't elaborate on. The records were clear. 2 payments had been made to the urology clinic. The first was 18 months ago, matching the invoice I'd found. The second was a smaller payment for a follow-up visit, made just 3 months after that. The second attachment was the masterstroke. Frank, using his license and a formal records request citing a pending civil litigation matter, a fabrication, but a legally effective one in Norland, had obtained not a full medical record, which would have been protected, but a simple, signed, and dated confirmation of service. It was a standard form the clinic provided for insurance or legal purposes. It was an official document, on the clinic's letterhead, detailing the date of service and the medical procedure performed. My hands were steady as I double-clicked the file. The document filled my screen. There it was, in stark, clinical black and white. Patient name, Ethan Crowell. Date of procedure, April 12, 2024. Service rendered, vasectomy. 18 months ago, a week after we signed the prenup, a year and a half of lies, of fake appointments, of public pronouncements about his desire for a family. 18 months of him watching me, tracking my cycle, encouraging my hope, all while knowing it was an impossibility he himself had engineered. The cruelty of it was breathtaking in its scope and simplicity. He hadn't just lied. He had constructed an elaborate long-term psychological torture chamber, and he had made me its sole inhabitant. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply clicked print. I walked over to the printer and watched the page slide out. Warm to the touch, the document was perfect. At the bottom was a seal, an official stamp from the clinic's medical records department, pressed in vivid red ink. It was slightly blurry, a small circular smudge of crimson on the sterile white page. It looked like a smear of lipstick on a freshly laundered collar. It was the proof, it was the weapon, and it was mine. With the confirmation of Ethan's vasectomy secured, the personal betrayal was catalogued and filed away. Now, I had to connect it to the corporate conspiracy. My grief was a private matter. The plot to oust me was a violation of governance, and in that arena, I was the expert. My next phase of investigation took place in the digital shadows of Caldera North's own infrastructure, using the very tools of my trade. My access as head of compliance was extensive. I could see the architecture of the company's daily operations, the digital ghost of every meeting, email, and keystroke. I began with the meeting room booking system. I cross-referenced the calendars of Ethan Crowell, Brenda, our head of HR, and Lyle Carr, the investor who held our company's fate in his manicured hands. A pattern emerged immediately. Over the past 6 weeks, there had been 3 meetings involving only the 3 of them. They were booked in the executive suite's private conference room, a soundproofed glass box reserved for sensitive negotiations. Each meeting was scheduled for exactly 1 hour, and each had the same subject line, a single, uninformative hyphen. No agenda was attached. No meeting notes were ever filed. In the world of corporate compliance, a meeting with no paper trail is not a casual chat. It's a red flag the size of a burning building. Next, I moved to the shared HR policy drive. I was looking for a specific type of document. A draft, unapproved. Unannounced changes to company policy are often where the real intent of leadership is revealed, before it's sanitized by lawyers. I ran a search for documents modified in the last 90 days by anyone in Brenda's direct reporting line. I waded through dozens of minor updates to holiday schedules and expense reporting. And then I found it. The file was innocuously named Benefits Update Q4 Draft V2 Doc X. Inside was a proposed amendment to our health insurance and benefits package. A new subclause was being added to the section on fertility assistance and IVF coverage. My blood ran cold as I read the carefully chosen, lethally biased language. It proposed that employees who, after a year of attempted treatment, were deemed to have a low probability of successful reproductive outcome would be reclassified. Their access to the Advanced IVF Support Program would be terminated. The justification was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. To reallocate resources effectively and mitigate potential negative impacts on projected employee performance and long-term productivity. It was a policy designed to medically disenfranchise a specific type of employee. It was a tool to legally discriminate against someone just like the person they were pretending I was. The document's track changes feature was still on. It showed that the initial draft had been written by Brenda, and the specific phrasing about projected performance had been a suggested edit from Ethan. The pieces were locking into place. They were creating a corporate mechanism to justify pushing me out. But I needed more. I needed proof of malice, something that connected their plot directly to me. I found it in the email server archives. An official compliance audit of email communications is a serious step, one that requires documented cause. I created that cause, opening a formal ticket to investigate a potential breach of conduct regarding the dissemination of sensitive employee health information. Citing the rumors about my infertility, this gave me the legal and procedural cover I needed. I targeted Ethan's sent folder, I searched for my name, and there it was, sent 2 days after his public comment at the all-hands meeting. The recipient list included his boss, the head of revenue, and another senior sales director. The subject line was, "Gotta laugh, right?" Attached was a meme. It was a picture of a woman staring at a negative pregnancy test, with the caption, "My face when I check my portfolio performance." Below the image, Ethan had written a single line. "Some of us are just firing blanks in all departments, nor avail problems." He had put my name on it. He had sent it from his corporate email account. He had CC'd his superiors. He hadn't just been cruel, he had been stupid, he had been arrogant, and he had just handed me the key to his own destruction. I looked back at the document on my screen, the prenuptial agreement I had signed 2 years ago. I scrolled to Section 4B, the clause he had insisted upon. Behavior that results in significant reputational damage, potentially impacting professional standing or ongoing business deals. By creating and circulating that email, Ethan wasn't just harassing a colleague. He, as a director, was mocking a senior executive in charge of the company's governance. He had used company resources to defame his wife, the head of compliance, to his own managers. If that wasn't reputational damage, nothing was. And according to the contract he had written, that behavior triggered the forfeiture of his unvested stock options, all of them. The entire conspiracy was now laid bare, as clean and logical as a flowchart. It wasn't a messy, emotional drama. It was a cold financial calculation. Step 1. Ethan establishes a public narrative that I am infertile and therefore emotionally fragile. Step 2. HR builds a corresponding file, documenting my instability and creating a new policy that will eventually disqualify me from benefits, adding pressure. Step 3. My performance is scrutinized, my focus questioned, until I either quit under the strain or they manufacture cause to fire me. The outcome? I am gone before my substantial stock package vests in 6 months. My forfeited shares flow back to the company, inflating the value of the remaining options held by Ethan and his executive allies. My personal pain was simply collateral damage in a boardroom coup. My movements became swift and precise. There was no more investigation, only preparation. I was no longer a victim. I was a prosecutor building a case. I downloaded everything: the meeting logs, the policy draft with its revealing track changes, the saved chat logs from my team about the rumors, the email with the meme, complete with its header information showing the sender, recipients, and the exact IP address of the workstation it was sent from. I compiled my own medical report from Rivermere and the official confirmation of service for Ethan's vasectomy. I added the audio files from my recorded conversations with Brenda in HR. Every piece of evidence was time-stamped, cataloged, and saved onto a military-grade encrypted hard drive. I made 3 copies. Then, I drafted the official whistleblower complaint. It was 20 pages of pure, irrefutable fact. I cited violations of the Caldera North Code of Conduct, state anti-discrimination laws, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, and SEC regulations regarding executive misconduct and failure of fiduciary duty. It was not a plea for sympathy, it was an indictment. My final step was to engage outside counsel. I found the best employment litigation attorney in Brimwell, a woman named Thea Reed who had a reputation for dismantling corporate bullies. I paid her retainer and sent her a secure link to the encrypted drive. She called me back 2 hours later. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the thrill of the hunt in it. "Nora," she said, "they didn't just build a case against you, they built a gallows for themselves." She drafted a demand letter that was a work of art, outlining the claims for defamation, invasion of medical privacy, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The settlement figure she proposed was staggering. But she gave me one crucial piece of advice. "You have enough evidence here to end them 10 times over." She told me, "But the timing and the venue are everything. An email to the board is quiet. A lawsuit gets messy and slow. They will try to bury this in paperwork and NDAs. Don't press send on this complaint just yet. Don't detonate it in an office. You need to choose the one place where they have the most to lose, the place with the most witnesses. Pick the most crowded room you can find, and open the envelopes there." I knew the place. I checked the corporate calendar. A major dinner was scheduled for the following week. It was to celebrate the final closing of a new round of funding from Lyle Carr's investment firm. The deal Ethan had been working on for a year. It was his crowning achievement. The dinner was being held in the private dining room of the Aurelia Grand Hotel, the most exclusive, most opulent establishment in Brimwell. It was a temple of power and money. I picked up the phone. "Good evening, Aurelia Grand," a polite voice answered. "Hello," I said, my own voice smooth and steady. "I'd like to confirm the reservation for the Caldera North dinner, and I need to ensure my place setting is correct. The name is Nora Vale. I'll be seated at the main table." There was a pause. Then, "Of course, Ms. Vale, we have you right here." I hung up the phone. The trap was set. All I had to do now was choose what to wear. The private dining room at the Aurelia Grand was a cathedral of wealth. The air was cool and still, tasting of money and refrigerated flowers. A constellation of crystal teardrops hung from the chandelier overhead, refracting the light into 1,000 tiny, sharp stars that danced on the polished silver cutlery. Each place setting was a fortress of etiquette. A phalanx of forks and knives standing guard beside heavy porcelain plates, their rims painted with a thin line of gold. At the head of each setting, an ivory place card announced the name of a guest in elegant, embossed script. My own name, Nora Vale, looked back at me, a stranger in this opulent theater. Ethan was in his element, the conquering hero at his own victory feast. He stood, his crystal glass held high, a brilliant smile stretched across his face. He was incandescent with success. Beside him, Lyle Carr, the investor, looked on with the placid satisfaction of a king surveying his domain. Brenda from HR, seated to my right, clapped with a little too much enthusiasm, her diamond bracelets clattering softly. "To the future," Ethan began, his voice resonating with a confidence that filled the room. "To the partnership between Caldera North and Carr Ventures. To growth." He paused, his eyes sweeping the table, and then they settled on me. The smile tightened, became something sharper, something predatory. "And to family," he added, his voice dropping slightly, imbuing the word with a heavy, deliberate meaning meant only for me. "The families we build, and the ones we hope to." The clinking of glasses was like the shattering of thin ice. I raised my glass of water to my lips, my gaze steady, meeting his over the rim. I did not smile. I did not toast. I simply watched him, a silent observer at his coronation. I had chosen my armor for the evening with care, a black sheath dress, severe in its simplicity, with a neckline that was high and unforgiving. My hair was pulled back into a tight, low bun, not a single strand out of place. There was no jewelry, save for the small, functional watch on my wrist. In my lap, I held a small black clutch, its only adornment a silver clasp that was also a lock. It contained no makeup, no mirror, no feminine vanities. It contained 3 plain, white, letter-sized envelopes. The woman to my right, Brenda, was a sensory assault. Her perfume, a sharp, aggressive cloud of bergamot and something vaguely spicy, seemed to claw at the air around her. She kept leaning in, making pointless small talk about the decor. Her voice a high-pitched hum of anxiety disguised as excitement. "Isn't this just breathtaking? Nora, Ethan has really outdone himself." I would simply nod, my responses clipped and neutral. I was a black hole at the table, absorbing the light and chatter around me, giving nothing back. The meal progressed in a series of meticulously choreographed courses. The conversation was a predictable symphony of corporate self-congratulation. They talked about market share, profit margins, and the synergistic potential of the new partnership. Ethan led the discussion, witty and charming, deflecting praise with practiced humility, while subtly ensuring everyone knew this deal was his victory. Lyle Carr spoke in quiet, authoritative pronouncements, his words carrying the weight of the millions he commanded. Brenda laughed at all their jokes. I ate very little. Each bite was tasteless, each sip of water a deliberate, mechanical action. I was preserving my energy. I was waiting. In the corner of the room, a lone violinist played. He moved through a repertoire of classical pieces, his music a pleasant, unobtrusive backdrop to the business of power. I was listening intently, not to the notes, but for a specific melody. The main course plates were cleared away, the crumbs swept from the starched white linen by a silent, white-gloved waiter. The murmur of conversation softened into a contented lull. And then, I heard it, the first few melancholic, soaring notes of Autumn Waltz. It was a piece full of beauty and decay, a love song for things coming to an end. It was my cue. As the waiters moved silently around the table, placing intricate desserts of spun sugar and dark chocolate before each guest, I reached down and clicked open the lock on my clutch. The sound was almost imperceptible, lost in the soft clink of spoons against porcelain. But to me, it was as loud as a gunshot. My fingers found the 3 envelopes. They were cool and smooth to the touch. My movements were fluid, economical, and went almost unnoticed. I drew my hand from my lap. As the waiter set the dessert plate in front of Ethan, I slipped the first envelope under its edge, nudging it forward until it rested partially on the white tablecloth. I turned to my right. As Brenda's dessert arrived, I did the same, placing the second envelope under her plate. Then, I leaned forward slightly, reaching across the small space between my place setting and the one opposite, and slid the third and final envelope under the plate belonging to Lyle Carr. 3 white envelopes on a white tablecloth, stark and clinical against the gilded opulence of the room. On the front of each, I had written 2 words in neat, precise script with a dark blue fountain pen. The ink was the color of a deep bruise. "For your records." I placed my hands back in my lap and looked up. My work was done. Now, all I had to do was watch. It was Lyle who saw his first. He paused, his spoon halfway to his dessert, his brow furrowed in confusion. He nudged the envelope with a manicured finger. Then Brenda saw hers, her fork clattering against her plate. Finally, Ethan's gaze dropped from Lyle's face to the foreign object at his own place setting. He saw the envelope, then looked at me, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. I broke the silence. My voice was calm, conversational, as if I were commenting on the wine. I looked around the table, at the three of them, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "A small commemorative gift," I said, offering a serene, empty smile, "to mark the occasion of tonight's successful deal." Ethan's lips curled into his familiar, condescending sneer. He picked up the envelope, holding it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were something distasteful. "Nora," he said, his voice dripping with long-suffering amusement for the benefit of his boss and investor, "you're being dramatic again." I did not let the smile falter. I held his gaze. The violinist was reaching the crescendo of the waltz, the notes swelling with a sad, final beauty. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath. "No, Ethan," I replied, my voice perfectly level, stripping away any hint of the wife he thought he knew, and replacing it with the professional he had fatally underestimated. "I'm just delivering documents." Ethan, driven by arrogance, was the first to open his. He tore the paper with a flick of his wrist, a dismissive gesture meant to humor his hysterical wife. The single sheet of paper inside was not a letter. It was a document. He unfolded it. I watched the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin a pale, waxy mask under the warm lights of the chandelier. His eyes scanned the page, then scanned it again, as if the words would change. They would not. It was the confirmation of service from Klein and Rowe Urology. On official letterhead, at the bottom, a doctor's signature was scrawled above the typed name, at the top, his own, and in the center, next to the heading, "Service Rendered," was the single, irrefutable word, vasectomy. The date of the procedure was clearly printed, 18 months ago, 18 months before he had stood up in a corporate meeting and implicitly blamed my body for our childlessness. The paper in his hand was not just a medical record, it was a signed confession to a lie of breathtaking cruelty. Simultaneously, Brenda's manicured fingers, trembling slightly, slipped her document out of its envelope. It was not a medical form, but something far more familiar to her. A screenshot, a high-resolution image of a Microsoft Word document, the interface instantly recognizable. It was the draft of the new IVF benefits policy, and on the right-hand side of the page was the column of tracked changes, each suggestion and deletion marked in damning red text. Floating next to the most viciously worded clause, the one about terminating benefits based on projected employee performance, was a small comment box, and inside that box was her name, Brenda Larson, followed by the edit she had proposed. It was a digital fingerprint, proving she was the architect of the very policy that would have been used to professionally euthanize me. Her breath caught in a sharp, audible gasp. Across the table, Lyle Carr, a man accustomed to reading billion-dollar contracts, stared at his own pages. His envelope contained not one sheet, but 3, stapled neatly at the corner. It was an email chain. I had formatted it perfectly, including the full headers with timestamps and IP addresses. His eyes, cold and gray as a winter sea, widened in disbelief. He was reading his own words, his own casual, dismissive language, sent from his private email account to Ethan's. "We need to manage the Nora liability before the vesting date. The optics of a firing are bad. Better if she leaves on her own. The infertility angle is strong. It gives us cover. The hit to the stock pool if she vests is 7 figures. Push her out. Consider it a cost-saving initiative." He was reading a transcript of his own conspiracy, a cold calculation that reduced my life, my body, and my career to a line item on a balance sheet. The powerful investor had vanished, replaced by a common corporate criminal caught red-handed. The world stopped. The dessert course, a delicate construction of chocolate and gold leaf, sat untouched on their plates, melting slowly into ruin. A fork, halfway to Brenda's mouth, froze in midair before clattering onto the porcelain, the sound echoing in the sudden, profound silence. The violinist, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, faltered, his bow scraping discordantly against a string before he, too, fell silent. All that remained was the low hum of the hotel's ventilation and the frantic, shallow breathing of the three people I had just condemned. Ethan found his voice first. It was a hoarse, strangled sound, nothing like the smooth, confident tone he had used to toast his success just minutes before. He looked from me to Lyle, his face pleading, desperate to re-establish their alliance. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, shaking his head. "There's context. No one understands the context." "I have the context," I interrupted. My voice was quiet, but it sliced through his panicked babble. I reached into my clutch and retrieved a small, silver USB drive. It was sealed in a clear, tamper-proof evidence bag. I placed it gently on the white tablecloth in the center of the table. It lay there like a tiny, polished coffin. "This contains the full context, the system access logs, the draft policy's complete version history, witness statements from colleagues regarding the rumors you started, and the complete, legally obtained audio recordings of my meetings with HR." I looked directly at Brenda, whose face had gone from pale to a ghastly shade of gray. All admissible under Norland's one-party consent laws. Lyle Carr's face was slick with a thin sheen of sweat. His eyes darted from the USB drive to my face. His mask of aristocratic calm shattered, revealing the raw panic of a man who saw his empire, his reputation, teetering on the brink. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "Is this blackmail?" The accusation hung in the air. This was his last, desperate move, to reframe my evidence as a crime, to paint me as the aggressor. I let a beat of silence pass, allowing his words to fully register with everyone at the table. Then I leaned forward slightly. "No, Mr. Carr," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice. "Blackmail is a demand for payment to conceal a crime. This," I gestured to the envelopes and the USB drive, "is a formal compliance report detailing multiple breaches of corporate governance and potential felonies, and you just acknowledged receipt of the evidence in front of witnesses." A choked, hysterical sound erupted from my right. It was Brenda. She was trying to laugh, a horrifying, broken noise that was half gasp, half sob. "This is absurd," she managed to say, her voice cracking. She reached for her wine glass, but her hand was shaking so violently that she knocked it over. Dark red wine bled across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a pool of ink, a dark, spreading stain that crept towards the evidence. It was the color of guilt. The violinist, standing frozen in the corner, packed his instrument away with quiet, urgent movements. He wanted no part of this. The restaurant manager, a tall man with a perpetually concerned expression, had appeared at the edge of the room. He caught my eye, then glanced meaningfully towards two large, impeccably dressed men who had materialized near the doorway. They did not look like hotel staff. They were Lyle Carr's private security detail, their faces impassive, their posture radiating a quiet, menacing readiness. They weren't here for me. They were here for him. The evening was over. The performance was done, and the careers of the three most powerful people at the table had just been placed in my hands. In the suffocating silence of the room, while the spilled wine seeped into the fine linen, my hands moved calmly beneath the table. I unlocked my phone. My thumb hovered for a fraction of a second over the contact name, Thea Reed, Counsel. I typed a single, 5-letter word into the message field, a command I had rehearsed in my mind 100 times. "Open." I pressed send. The message disappeared into the ether. A silent, digital arrow shot from a hotel dining room into the heart of Caldera North's executive leadership, miles away. I knew. My lawyer was receiving that signal, and with a single click, she would release the email we had prepared. an email that had been sitting on a server, scheduled and waiting for this exact moment. Its destination, the private, confidential inbox of every single member of the board of directors. A soft chime sounded from the company-issued phone in my clutch. It was an automated notification. I took it out and placed it on the table. The screen lit up, displaying a system alert from Caldera North's internal compliance portal. It was a confirmation receipt, time-stamped and logged. New whistleblower report filed. Case 77B4A. Subject: Executive misconduct and governance failure. Evidence packet attached. Time: 2041. Location: Aurelia Grand Hotel. I had not just brought evidence to a dinner, I had turned the dinner itself into Exhibit A. My next action was deliberate and public. I navigated to my phone's contact list and found the number for the secretary of the board. I pressed the call button and then immediately tapped the speakerphone icon. The ringing echoed in the silent room, each electronic tone a hammer blow against the tension. After 2 rings, a crisp, professional voice answered. "Eleanor Vance speaking." "Eleanor, this is Nora Vale," I said, my voice steady. "I am calling to confirm that you and the board have received my report, filed at 2041. There was a pause, the sound of a keyboard clicking on the other end of the line. "Yes, Nora," she said, her voice now tight with formality. "Receipt is confirmed. The board is convening an emergency session. As per protocol, you are all instructed to preserve the status quo. No documents are to be altered or destroyed. All parties are to remain available. Is that understood?" "Perfectly," I said. "Thank you, Eleanor." I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the table. The official machinery of the corporation had now been publicly engaged. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It was a board-level crisis. The effect was instantaneous. Lyle Carr's personal security guards, who had been standing impassively by the door, moved with silent, coordinated purpose. One approached Lyle and murmured something in his ear. Lyle, his face a mask of stone, nodded once. He pushed his chair back, stood, and without a glance at me or Ethan, turned and walked out of the room, flanked by his protectors. He was not fleeing. He was being extracted, sealed off, a compromised asset being taken off the board before he could do more damage. Brenda's phone began to vibrate violently against the table, a frantic, buzzing panic. She fumbled for it, her eyes wide with terror. She answered, her voice a choked whisper. "Yes, now?" She listened for a moment, her face collapsing in on itself. "I understand." She shoved the phone into her purse, pushed her chair back so violently it nearly tipped over, and fled the room without a word. A soldier deserting a battlefield. Now, it was just the 2 of us, Ethan and I, sitting amidst the wreckage of our marriage and his career, the spilled wine a bloody Rorschach test on the tablecloth between us. The silence that descended was heavier, more personal. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, horrified comprehension. The anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic plea. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His touch was cold, clammy. "Nora," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, let's just go home. We can talk about this. We can fix this." I looked down at his hand on mine, this foreign object, this appendage of a man I no longer knew. I slowly, deliberately, pulled my hand out from under his. I met his gaze, and for the first time that night, I let him see the abyss of my contempt. "Who's home, Ethan?" I asked. The question was soft, but it landed like a physical blow. His hand recoiled as if burned. From my clutch, I produced one final item, a smaller envelope, the size of a greeting card. I slid it across the table. It stopped directly in front of him. He stared at it, his breathing ragged. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "That," I said, "is a copy of the formal notice sent to your legal counsel an hour ago. It invokes Section 4B of our prenuptial agreement." I paused, letting the words sink in. The clause regarding reputational damage. the one you wrote." He looked at me, his face a canvas of disbelief and despair. "As of the board's receipt of my whistleblower complaint," I continued, my voice the dispassionate tone of a compliance officer reading a report, "all your unvested stock options have been frozen. Pending the outcome of the independent investigation you are now under, your corporate credit card is suspended. You will leave it on the table." That was what finally broke him: the loss of money, the loss of status, the public neutering, the carefully constructed facade of Ethan Crowell, the successful dealmaker, the master of the universe, shattered into a million pieces. A raw, primal rage contorted his features. With a guttural roar, he shoved himself away from the table, seized his heavy oak dining chair, and hurled it against the wall. It splintered on impact, the sound of violent explosion in the quiet room. He lunged forward, his hands reaching for me, but he never made it. Two of the Aurelia's security guards, drawn by the commotion, were instantly on him. They were large, professional men, and they subdued him with an efficient, almost bored competence. Pinning his arms behind his back, he struggled, a wild animal caught in a trap, his curses echoing in the opulent room. As they dragged him away, a disgraced king being removed from his conquered court. I turned my head. My eyes found the violinist, who was still standing in the corner, his instrument clutched in his hand, his face a mask of shock. I offered him a small, tired smile. "Thank you for your patience," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the now silent room. "You can continue playing now." I did not wait to watch them clear the wreckage. I left the broken chair, the spilled wine, and the ghosts of 3 ruined careers in the silent dining room. I walked out into the grand lobby of the Aurelia, my heels clicking a steady, even rhythm on the polished marble floor. The air here was different, vast and anonymous, filled with the quiet comings and goings of strangers. It was a neutral space, and for the first time in a long time, I felt I could breathe. I found a quiet alcove, furnished with a single velvet armchair, and sat down. I took out my phone, but I didn't look at the news alerts or the panicked emails that I knew were already starting to flood my inbox. Instead, I navigated to the contact information for the Rivermere Clinic. I dialed the after-hours number for their patient portal support. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Rivermere Health, this is Maria. How can I help you?" "Hello," I said, my voice as calm as hers. "My name is Nora Stone. I was a patient 2 weeks ago. I need another copy of my diagnostic summary sent to the email address on file. Immediately." I was not asking. I was instructing. This was not a medical request. It was an act of reclamation. "Of course, ma'am. Can you verify your date of birth for me?" I gave it to her. I heard the soft clicking of a keyboard. "All right, Ms. Stone, the file has been resent to your secure email. You should receive it within the next 5 minutes. Is there anything else?" "No," I said. "Thank you for your efficiency." I ended the call. I opened my email. I didn't have to wait 5 minutes. The notification popped up almost instantly. Subject: Your Rivermere Health Patient Summary. I opened it. There it was again, the clean clinical PDF, the black and white proof of my own body's integrity. Conclusion: all assessed values are within normal ranges. No indications of fertility impairment were found. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I had known it was true, but seeing it again, in this moment, after the battle, felt different. It was a confirmation not just of my health, but of my sanity. I had not been obsessed. I had been systematically gaslit. With methodical taps of my thumb, I forwarded the email. I sent it to the entire board of directors, to Thea Reed, and to the head of Caldera North's in-house legal department. I didn't add any commentary. I didn't write a single sentence of explanation. The document spoke for itself. I only changed the subject line. I typed out the words with cold, deliberate precision. Medical defamation, impact to corporate governance. In that subject line, I took their weapon and turned it into my shield. I reframed the narrative completely. This was no longer a messy personal tragedy. It was a governance issue. a risk management failure, a potential lawsuit that would cost the company millions and tarnish its reputation beyond repair. It was a language they understood. It was a language they feared more than anything. I leaned my head back against the cool velvet of the chair. I thought about the word Ethan had used, the word that had started it all, Barren. It wasn't a medical diagnosis. He knew that. It was a social weapon, a carefully chosen slur, designed to do one thing: invalidate a woman. In the corporate world, it was a particularly potent poison. To be barren was to be seen as incomplete, defective, and most critically, distracted. It implied a hidden, all-consuming grief that rendered you unreliable. It suggested your focus was not on the quarterly reports or the strategic plans, but on your own empty, broken body. It was a quiet, insidious way to sideline a woman, to question her commitment, to suggest she was too emotional to lead. It was a way to dismiss her ambition as a sad compensation for a failed biological purpose. It was a way to fire a woman without ever saying the word. I took out the small, leather-bound notebook I always carried, the one where I had written Instance 1, Public Humiliation. I turned to a fresh page. The lobby was quiet, the only sound the distant whisper of the rain against the tall glass windows. My pen scratched across the paper. I wrote a single sentence. I am not infertile. I was silenced. That was the truth. My body was never the problem. My voice was, my position, my intelligence, my refusal to be a passive, supportive corporate wife. That was the threat. His lie about my fertility was never about having a child. It was about taking my power. I began to draft a new document on my phone. Not an emotional statement, but a communication plan. An internal memo to be released to all Caldera North employees, pending board approval. It would not be a lecture. It would not be a story of my pain. It would be a timeline, a simple, brutal, factual account. Date A, prenuptial agreement signed. Date B, vasectomy procedure performed. Date C, public statement made at all hands meeting. Date D, internal HR policy on IVF benefits drafted. It would be an autopsy of a conspiracy, laid out with the cold precision of a compliance report. There would be no adjectives, only documents, no opinions, only signatures. As I was typing, a movement near the hotel's main entrance caught my eye. The large revolving doors turned slowly, depositing Lyle Carr onto the rain-slicked pavement outside. He stood for a moment under the hotel's awning, his head bowed, waiting for his car. He did not look back. He did not look at me. The rain had intensified, and the fine gray wool of his expensive suit jacket was dark with moisture, the patches on his shoulders and back spreading like fresh ink stains. The very picture of guilt. His car, a low black sedan, pulled up to the curb, and he disappeared inside without a word. The first domino had fallen. My phone buzzed. It was an email from our chief legal officer. It was a forward of another email, one sent just moments before. The original sender was Brenda Larson. Subject, request for leave. The message was short. Due to a personal family emergency, I am requesting an immediate and indefinite leave of absence, effective immediately. The second domino, a quiet, desperate retreat. The final piece of information came from my lawyer. Thea, a text message. The board has placed Ethan on administrative leave and suspended all communications. They have him. He's silent. Silent. I thought about all the words Ethan had used to build my cage. Sensitive, obsessed, barren, dramatic. He had a lie for every occasion, a manipulation for every conversation. His entire world was constructed of words, and now he had none left, for the very first time, faced with the stark, undeniable truth. Ethan Crowell was silent, and in his silence, I finally heard my own voice again, clear and strong and utterly my own. There was no trial, no courtroom, no jury. The verdict was delivered not by a judge, but by the swift, merciless mechanics of corporate self-preservation. It arrived the next morning, not with a gavel's crack, but with the soft chime of a company-wide email. The subject line was sterile. Leadership update. The email, from the chairman of the board, was a masterclass in corporate damage control. It announced that Ethan Crowell and Brenda Larson had been placed on immediate, indefinite administrative leave to allow for a full, independent, third-party investigation into a serious governance matter. The language was precise, cold, and final. It was the corporate equivalent of a public execution, carried out in the quiet blue light of 1,000 computer screens across the city. The second blow fell an hour later, not within the company, but upon the market itself. Carr Ventures issued a formal press release. I read it on a financial news terminal, the stark black text scrolling across the screen. The firm was officially re-evaluating and withdrawing its proposed investment commitment in Caldera North, citing significant and unforeseen governance risks that have recently come to light. In a separate, devastating paragraph, it announced that Lyle Carr was taking a temporary sabbatical from his active role in the fund's management to focus on a personal matter. The multi-million-dollar deal that was to have been Ethan's legacy had evaporated. Lyle Carr, the kingmaker, had been dethroned by a single email chain. By mid-morning, a formal letter arrived in my inbox from our chief legal officer. It was not warm, it was not personal, it was a carefully worded instrument of de-escalation. It offered a sincere and profound apology on behalf of the organization for the procedural oversights and the distressing environment I had been subjected to. It confirmed the immediate restoration of all my benefits and privileges, including full and uncapped access to the fertility assistance program, the very program they had tried to write me out of. It was a formal, legalistic cleansing, an attempt to wash the company's hands of the filth its own executives had created. I did not reply. I simply filed it away in a new folder labeled Correspondence Log. Then came the message from my lawyer. Thea, it was brief and brutally efficient. Notice of invocation of prenuptial clause 4B has been accepted and executed by Crowell's counsel. His entire unvested stock portfolio is now legally frozen and subject to forfeiture. He has no access. You broke him with his own pen. Well done. The weapon Ethan had so cleverly designed to disarm me had detonated in his own hands, vaporizing the fortune he had built his life around. It was a perfect, symmetrical justice. The chairman of the board requested a video call at noon. He looked tired, his face etched with the strain of a man trying to keep a battleship from sinking. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He offered me the role of acting chief compliance officer for the entire company, effective immediately. It was not a promotion born of merit. It was an act of strategic desperation. They needed me, my name, once the subject of pathetic gossip, was now the only one associated with integrity. I was the whistleblower, the one who had exposed the rot. Placing me in charge was their only credible signal to the market, to the regulators, that they were serious about cleaning up the mess. The company needs you to guide it through this, Nora, he said, his voice heavy. We need to restore confidence. I understand, I replied, my voice even. I accept the position. My terms will be delivered by my counsel by end of day. I was not a grateful employee being rewarded. I was a specialist being brought in to manage a crisis, and I would be compensated accordingly. The atmosphere in the office building was electric with rumor and fear. The whispers that had once followed me down the hallways, dripping with pity, had changed. Now, they were laced with awe and a healthy dose of terror. I was no longer poor Nora, I was Nora Vale, the woman who had taken down 3 titans in a single night. People made eye contact, then quickly looked away. The internal chat channels, once filled with speculation about my womb, were now silent. My name had become a symbol of a new kind of power, one that didn't rely on sales figures or charm, but on the cold, hard currency of truth. That afternoon, I performed one final administrative task. I went to a post office far from my apartment. In my bag was a small, padded envelope. Inside it was my platinum wedding band. I had already filled out a standard company asset return form, the kind used for laptops or security badges. I had simply created my own line items. Item description: 1. 1. Platinum ring. Reason for return. End of contractual obligation. Condition. Used. At the top of the form, where one would normally write a department name. I had written in neat, block letters, return of company property. Emotional version. I did not include a note. There was no final, tear-stained letter, no angry tirade, no fond farewell. Our marriage had been a transaction, and its end would be documented as such. There were no more emotions left to transact, only paperwork. The ring was not a symbol of lost love. It was a depreciated asset being returned to its point of origin. I sealed the envelope and sent it via registered mail. It required a signature upon receipt. There would be proof of delivery. The next morning, I stood by the coffee machine in the executive suite kitchen. The machine whirred and hissed, a mundane, comforting sound. I watched the dark liquid drip into a clean white mug, the brown foam, the crema, bubbling up to the surface. It was an ordinary moment, profoundly so. The quiet hum of the office, the scent of coffee, the gray light of a new day filtering through the window. There was no chaos, no drama, just the steady, predictable rhythm of a world moving on. I felt a sense of stillness I hadn't realized I'd lost. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't joy. It was the simple, clean feeling of a slate wiped clean. Later that day, back in my new, larger office, I opened my personal laptop. I navigated to the encrypted drive. There was the folder that had consumed my life for weeks. Aurelia. Evidence. I opened it one last time, looking at the cataloged files. The audio recordings, the medical reports, the screenshots, the emails. They were the weapons I had used to win the war. But the war was over. Their purpose was served. The official whistleblower report, containing every one of these files, was now the company's property, the board's problem. My private collection was now a liability. I dragged the folder to the trash bin icon on my desktop. A small dialog box appeared. Are you sure you want to permanently delete these items? I clicked yes. There was no ceremony, no hesitation. I then right-clicked on the trash bin itself. Empty trash. I clicked again. The icon, once full, was now empty. It was a blank space, a room that had been swept clean, every last speck of dust and debris removed. The case was closed, and I was finally, completely, free. In the late afternoon, with the sky outside the color of a healing bruise, I found myself walking back to the Aurelia Grand. I wasn't sure why, but my feet carried me there, a pilgrimage to the site of a battle that was already over. I walked alone. The hotel lobby was quieter now, the hushed, respectful silence of old money at rest. No one stopped me as I made my way to the private dining wing. The doors to the room were slightly ajar. I pushed one open and stepped inside. The lights were off, the room steeped in shadow. The only illumination, a pale, gray light filtering through the tall windows. The staff had cleared most of the debris, but they had left the main table, a long, ghostly white rectangle in the gloom. 3 place settings remained, like memorials. 3 white porcelain plates, 3 sets of polished silver, 3 crystal glasses, and on the starched linen, next to each plate, I could just make out the faintest, almost invisible trace of adhesive, a faint rectangular ghost where an envelope had once rested, the evidence of the evidence. From my bag, I took out a single stem of a white orchid, its petals perfect and waxen. I had bought it from a street vendor on the way here. I leaned over the dark, polished wood of the table and laid the flower down in the center. It was not a gesture of love, or forgiveness, or remembrance. It was a tribute to the truth, a stark, white fact laid bare on a field of white linen. The flower did not need words to explain its presence. It simply was. As I stood there in the silent room, my phone vibrated in my pocket. The sudden intrusion was jarring. I pulled it out. The screen glowed in the dim light. It was an email from the chairman of the board. The subject was short. Investigation update. I opened it. The body of the email was even shorter. The independent investigators have submitted their preliminary report. The initial findings have substantiated the core claims of your complaint. The case is now officially closed. The board will proceed accordingly. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It wasn't a sigh of relief or of sadness. It was just air leaving my lungs, making way for new air. I looked out the window at the rain-washed city. There were no tears. I had shed none through this entire ordeal. All the grief and rage had been transmuted, burned away as fuel for the engine of my methodical campaign. What was left was not an absence of feeling, but a profound and welcome emptiness. The clean, crisp, ozone-scented air after a violent thunderstorm has finally passed. My thumbs moved across the screen of their own accord. I opened my message history with Ethan. Our last exchange had been weeks ago, full of his banal logistics and my one-word replies. I typed one final message to him. I knew his phone had been returned to him, a personal effect deemed irrelevant to the investigation. I knew he would see it. My words were not an accusation, nor an explanation. They were a closing statement. My silence was not acceptance. It was evidence, waiting for the right moment. I pressed send. I did not wait to see if he would read it. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving the orchid to keep its lonely vigil in the dark. I walked across the vast marble expanse of the lobby towards the main entrance. The large revolving door spun in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. As I stepped into one of the glass partitions, I saw my own reflection. For a moment, as the door turned, there were three of me, superimposed on one another, a trinity of images, each one a little clearer than the last. Then, as the partition completed its turn, they merged back into one, and I was gone, released from the Hall of Mirrors. I paused at the threshold, on the line between the hotel's conditioned calm and the city's chaotic pulse. I was clutching my bag, the same small black clutch I had carried the night before. My fingers tightened around it, and I was struck by the lightness of it. It was empty. There were no more envelopes. There were no more documents. There were no more excuses left to carry. I stepped out onto the street. The air was cool and damp against my skin. The traffic light at the corner flicked from red to green. A yellow taxi, its headlights cutting twin beams through the twilight, pulled away from the curb and glided past me. It left a long, fading streak of light in its wake, a fleeting brushstroke of motion against the static backdrop of the city. Then it, too, was gone, disappearing into the traffic, moving forward. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, and support us further by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.